Hello, Bob. Had a good trip?
Oh, all right.
All right. Except that he spent 2 days in the icy waters of the North Atlantic after being torpedoed on the way to Murmansk.
All right, y'all. Welcome back to Commodore Arms channel. Okay, so we're finishing up the Know Your Ally documentary. Now, in the first part, we saw a lot about how Britain sort of entered World War II and how they were remaining persistent and sort of dedicated into fighting against the Nazis. Now, I'm hoping in this second part, again, since this documentary is meant to sort of inform and educate American GIs, I'm hoping in the second half of this, we're going to go over some more like customs and, courtesies of just the British people in general. But yeah, I'm excited to check it out. So let's do it.
And that is why in the heart of London, alongside his great naval hero, Nelson, John Britain has put George Washington.
Oh, yeah.
And
I remember seeing that, and I had a lot of questions about that. I was really confused as to why he was there or how long he's actually been there, but I guess it's been there for a while. I know near, I forgot where it was. I think it was in between like Westminster Abbey and Buckingham Palace. There was a statue of Lincoln somewhere near that. And I kind of wondered that as well. Like, why was Abe Lincoln just randomly in the middle of London as well? So, yeah, it's pretty cool to see that. I got to say, as an American, it's kind of cool to see those things lying around.
Parliament Square, the most sacred spot in the British Commonwealth of Nations, Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, okay. Parliament Square. There we go. Yeah, that's so cool. It's kind of funny that they mentioned it. Okay, so, yeah. It doesn't look much different, I gotta say. It's pretty funny to see.
Wealth of Nations, Abraham Lincoln.
That's cool.
Of course, Hitler doesn't like this kind of talk. His job is to sell the British that we are a nation of money grubbers. And gangsters.
Oh, where's the
While in
Tommy
the
gun?
next studio, he is selling us the idea that the British are gutless and dopes. The John Q. Public and John Britain are entirely different. All right, Hitler, where are these miners? Wales or West Virginia? These farmers, Devonshire or Wisconsin?
That's funny. That's
These
cool.
steel workers, Sheffield or Pittsburgh?
I like that.
These children, American or British, they live in lands which share the same hopes, the same ideals, and unlike the poor children of Germany, in lands where the truth is free.
Nice. Okay, that was a good touch. That was a good intro for this part.
But let's not kid ourselves. Britain is not the United States, and the United States is not Britain. For instance, we don't go in for this kind of thing.
Oh, is that Parliament?
But there's no mystery about that. Remember our grandmother's house?
Maybe.
It was old-fashioned, out of date, patched and altered to suit each new generation, and filled with family relics even grandmother couldn't explain. Well, John Britain has been living in his house for a long time. And that's why to us, who live in a modern house that we built ourselves to suit ourselves.
It's always really cool when they start mentioning stuff that we sort of already talked about. But yeah, it's awesome the amount of thoughts that actually went into the sort of narration for this, because it's really getting you to think past some of the more like superficial things. Like, although we don't have the same sports or even the same clothes or eat the same stuff, we can move a little bit past that and see some of the stuff that's more ingrained in our values. And it's going to be values and beliefs that we share. And you can pretty much tell that just by our democracies alone. So it's kind of cool to see that. It's kind of cool to sort of relate on that sort of level.
Time. And that's why to us, who live in a modern house that we built ourselves to suit ourselves, John Britain seems slow-moving and cluttered up with ancient traditions. Kings, for instance. The present king rode to his coronation in the same coach, to the same church, for the same ceremony as his ancestors did. But the job...
That's kind of cool to think about. Is this thing made out of like solid gold or something? Okay, that's kind of cool. Yeah, if you guys could tell me some history about that thing. It looks pretty ornate, but pretty cool. And especially if it's still sticking around today, that'd be pretty cool to learn about.
Church, for the same ceremony as his ancestors did. But the job he took on is very different from theirs. There have been some changes made. For the British king can no longer make laws or impose taxes or interfere with government. He and his family work as hard as any other citizen, doing the job that the people expect of them. Today, the king is the servant of the people and not its ruler. When an American is arrested and brought to trial, the bailiff calls his case
The People versus John Doe.
But if such a case were called in Britain, it would be
The King versus John Doe.
It means the same thing. Today, the British
Interesting.
king is the symbol of the people. The British are great fans of the fellow in Buckingham Palace. But when they sing God Save the King, they're not worrying about his health. They mean God bless the British people.
Nice. I like
And the
that.
dukes and the earls. But in 1911, the people took away the last remaining power of the lords to block the action of the people's representatives. Dukes and earls don't run the country anymore. Today, there are only two people who do that. John Britton and his wife.
I like that. That's kind of cool. I didn't know it was that recent. I mean, they said 1911. I mean, it's not really that recent when you're talking about today. So I kind of wonder how it was before they actually did all that. I know there were like earls and lords. I really don't understand what sort of power they actually had besides just being like wealthy or something. But I don't really know if they had like a sort of phasing process. I imagine there's some sort of phasing process to make it a little bit easier to make that switch to giving the general public a little bit more power. But yeah, it's pretty interesting to think that it persisted until the 20th century.
Polls, just as Mr. and Mrs. John Q. Public do here and elect their representatives to the House of Commons. And there they fix the taxes and make the laws. And if John wanted to get rid of the lords, his representatives in Commons can at any time vote them out of existence.
Ah, okay, that makes
But
sense.
John doesn't want to get rid of them. So he confuses us by keeping dukes and lords in a country where unions have long been accepted as an essential part of the democratic system, where the Labour Party, controlled by the unions, is one of the two great political parties, where longshoremen and railroad engineers have been ministers of the Crown, and where for 30 years he has had a system of social security even more extensive than our own.
Really? Dang.
So when you
These
read
old
about
clips are
Lord
awesome.
Louis Mountbatten or Lord Beaverbrook, former head of aircraft production, don't think they got their jobs because of their titles. They got them because they were the best men for the jobs. Just as Ernest Bevin, formerly a labor leader and now member of the War Cabinet, Herbert Morrison, who started life as an errand boy and is now Minister of Home Security, got their important jobs because they were the best men for them.
That's kind of cool. I like how they're giving actual examples of people who have sort of transcended the old ways and got to the position that they're in because of them just being the best at what they do. That's kind of cool. I like having those examples. And again, just having the old school footage gives us a good appreciation for what the actual workers looked like. And of course, having the individuals themselves gives us a good idea of what was going on back then.
With the things on the surface, the unimportant things, their John Britton and our John Q. Public differ. But the important part of their lives, they run the same way, the democratic way, the free way.
But this gentleman never bothered about the truth. And when John Britton started carrying the war to Germany, he tried a new line.
The warmonger Churchill only wages this war against the German people to save the British Empire.
All right, let's take a look at that one. Here's the British Empire. And here's where the Germans were headed when Britain declared war. Does that look like trying to save the empire? Tackling Germany when it was headed into Poland and toward Russia? The one direction in which there were no British possessions?
That's
After
funny.
Poland fell, Hitler hinted at peace with the British. This was the perfect chance to save the empire. But it wasn't saving the empire that the British were thinking about.
The position of His Majesty's government in respect of any peace offer by Hitler. We are not, in any circumstances, prepared to negotiate with him at any time on any subject.
Nice, that's legendary right there.
And after Britain had been on the losing end, month after month, it had another chance to save the empire. Even now, Hitler thought John Britton would make a deal. We heard the British answer.
What kind of a people do they think we are?
Oh yeah.
Is it possible they do not realize that we shall never cease to persevere against them until they have been taught a lesson which they and the world will never forget?
Yeah, nice. I have a much better appreciation for Winston Churchill after watching the movie Darkest Hour. I didn't really know a whole lot about him. I know that he was pretty iconic in British history, but I didn't really get a good appreciation for why that was the case. And Darkest Hour, I'm sure, only really skims the surface, but I mean, you have to think, you had to have someone that knew what they were doing and also had the people's support to be in a position that he was in during the time he was actually in that position.
And let's take a look at this British Empire. The freedom we fought for in 1776
Golly.
has since freely given to Canada,
Wow, the old school
Australia,
flag.
New Zealand, South Africa. These are independent nations with their own parliaments, their own laws, even their own money systems, their own tariffs, which often work to Britain's disadvantage, their own armies and navies. Britain couldn't even take them into war if she wanted to. That's a problem they settled for themselves. Each one of the British Commonwealth of Nations declared war on Germany of its own free will.
That's cool.
Of course, no one ever talks about the British Empire today without mentioning India.
Nice.
And
And
men
the
of
old school
goodwill in
elephants.
Britain, as well as other countries, have been outspoken in their demands for Indian freedom.
I mean, I say old school elephants. I'm sure they're the same type of elephant that's around today. But I don't know. It's kind of funny to see like elephants being involved in this sort of like, I don't know, scenario or this environment, like this war environment. War elephant just sounds like such an old school thing, but this is pretty weird to see. And holy cow, that elephant is freaking massive. Maybe it wasn't the same kind of elephant. I don't know. That thing looks
Britain,
huge.
as well as other countries, have been outspoken in their demands for Indian freedom.
I'd get
For
sick
no
being
man
on the top.
who believes in democracy can support foreign rule of any people. But there are things that many of us do not know about India. For instance, that India pays no taxes to Britain, either directly or indirectly. That the Indians fix their own tariff laws, frequently to Britain's disadvantage. That of the Viceroy's Executive Council, 11 of the 15 members are Indians. And in the courts, 10 of every 11 judges. Furthermore, that no Indian is ever conscripted for service in the Army and Navy. It was voluntary enlistment that raised the Indian Army from 170,000 at the outbreak of war to 1.25 million today.
Yeah, I know we watched a video previously about India during World War II, so we got some information about that. However, it was still a little bit vague as far as, you know, because I guess India had different factions, some that were against supporting and fighting the war with the Brits, and some that were for doing that. So I'm not sure how much that actually played a part in India actually getting those recruits and going and fighting war with the Brits. But again, we've seen that India carried some pretty substantial weight during World War II.
And on the subject of India, listen to the words of Field Marshal Jan Christian Smuts. He fought against the British 40 years ago, was defeated in his fight, and still became the leader of one of the British Commonwealths of Nations, Prime Minister of South Africa.
India, if she will, can be free in the same way and by the same means as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand are today free sovereign states. Their peoples worked out a constitution for themselves. The same course is open to India if the peoples of India will agree about the terms of a free constitution. Freedom isn't a thing that can be imposed from without. It can only be created from within.
That's a cool
The
statement
Indians
right
have a
there.
responsibility to reconcile the differences that exist in the vast Indian population, with its 100 different languages, its dozens of different religions. And on March the 11th, 1942, the British government placed itself on record and promised full self-government to India if India will work out a constitution that will satisfy its people after the war is over.
This footage is awesome.
But during this
I know
war,
I keep saying
military
that, but
leaders agree Allied troops are needed in India as an effective bloc by the democratic world to keep the Nazis and Japs from uniting. Further, India provides the bases for United Nations bombers to get at the chaps in Burma. In other parts of
Burma
the
was
empire,
pretty intense,
too,
huh?
democracy stands on guard. If it wasn't for the British at Gibraltar, Malta, Cyprus, Suez, Alexandria, and they're hanging on to them regardless of the cost.
Yeah, so I definitely want to learn a little bit more about these specific regions, especially Gibraltar, and sort of how the Brits maintain like a sort of foothold there. And Malta, I've heard a few things about Malta, but like the whole Mediterranean region, I'm not really too savvy on. I haven't watched many videos about the Mediterranean area during World War II, so that'd be pretty cool to check out as a future video.
And their drive across Libya to Tripoli, there would have been no American landing in North Africa.
What happened to that thing? Jeez Louise, what the heck?
There's another tune the Nazis play about the British Empire.
No thanks.
The British are sitting back, letting others fight the war for them.
Ooh, we know that tune very well. Britain will fight to the last Australian or Canadian or New Zealander. The truth that thousands of Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders have gallantly fought and gallantly died in Crete, in Greece, in Libya. But there's something the Nazi mouthpiece leaves out, something pretty important. Out of every 10 inhabitants of the British Empire, 1 comes from Britain. But of the casualties suffered so far in this war, 7 out of 10 were born and raised in Britain.
Damn.
1 of 10 in population, 7 of 10 in casualties.
I gotta say, sort of seeing like the Nazi propaganda and then also going like step by step and them just debunking everything that's being said is a cool way to organize a video, but at the same time it gives us a lot more appreciation for what the actual facts are, and just again a good appreciation for the sort of sacrifice that the Brits were actually doing during World War II.
Of the planes flying with the RAF in Britain, 2 out of 3 are manned by crews from the island. And of the planes on the overseas fronts, the Western Desert in Africa and the rest, 4 out of 5 are manned by boys from Britain.
Damn.
And then there's a little thing called the British Navy. From 1588, when it licked the Spanish Armada, to 1940, when we got moving on a 2-ocean navy, the greatest battle fleet in the world.
That's cool.
That too is manned almost entirely by men of Britain, the little island in the Atlantic, an island of seafarers. And the British Merchant Navy, still the greatest merchant navy in the world, in spite of all that Hitler can do. Men from every British town and village in the stokeholds of 10,000 ships, on ice-coated decks, in grimy engine rooms, men who have been torpedoed twice, 3 times.
Yeah, no kidding. Being in the Navy back then was a scary thing. That is terrifying.
There's one English sailor who's been torpedoed 6 times and still signed on again.
But we never hear about these things because of a curious character whose ways will never be completely understandable to an American. John Britton himself. He has an idea he shouldn't talk about himself and what he does. He calls it bad form. We call it damn silly. He'd say of a Spitfire, "Oh, she's not bad, little kite." But this man, the boss of the German Air Force, can tell us that the Spitfire has been the most deadly fighter in the world. And we certainly need an interpreter when this happens.
Hello, Bob. Had a good trip? Oh, all right.
All right. Except that he spent 2 days in the icy waters of the North Atlantic after being torpedoed on the way to Murmansk.
No kidding.
See this man? His name is Whitten Brown. And this man, believe it or not, is the first man who flew the Atlantic non-stop.
No kidding.
In 1919, 8 years before anyone else, he and John Alcock flew non-stop from Newfoundland to Ireland. But as usual, the British let it go at that, and Whitten Brown went back into obscurity. There's nothing wrong with John Britton that a correspondence course in showmanship wouldn't cure.
I like that. That's definitely a pretty stark comparison as to how people, at least how people vision Americans as far as just being like a little bit more loud in what they do and sort of some of those accomplishments. Of course, back in the day, everybody was sort of holding their own weights, but it gives us a good idea of some of those traditions and the mindset and just, you know, the humility of the British people.
For a moment, imagine that you're not American, but British.
All right.
You'd still be in uniform. For in Britain, every man between the age of 18 and 41, unless he cannot be replaced at a vital workbench, is already in uniform. Your old man, too. He's had to quit gassing about the last war, for they're now starting to draft men up to 51.
Good grief.
Dependents or no dependents. If you've got yourself into this mess, your draft board will say, "Frightfully sorry, old chap, but you're in the Army anyway."
Oh,
And your
man.
kid sister, if she isn't a sailor, or in the Air Force, or the Land Army, or a ferry pilot,
What's that?
or in the fire brigade, she's probably in the Army. For they've drafted unmarried women up to 30.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
And even if she's married, every woman up to 41 can be drafted to work in war plants. And it's a real draft. For 8 million workers, men and women, can't quit their jobs or be fired without government permission.
No kidding.
Britain
Did not
is
know
only
that.
20 miles from German guns and German planes. Everybody, man or woman, young or old, is in the front line.
Holy cow. I wonder if they got to keep those helmets. That'd be like a pretty weird sort of like family heirloom of like you just being a factory worker, or you're like your great grandfather was a factory worker and he just has this helmet that he kept for whenever like the air raid sirens were going on.
Maybe this isn't your idea of Britain. The ads were different, and you wondered whether they still made bows and arrows at the village forge.
The
The
forge.
ads kept quiet about industry,
Good grief.
just as this one leaves out the aircraft plants and the oil fields. Well, they have the rich green fields you've read about, the quiet country lanes, but they also have the steel mills of Sheffield, the Pittsburgh of Britain. They
Okay.
have the picturesque little villages, the gently flowing streams, the lovely old castles. But they also have the shipyards of the River Clyde, not as modern as Henry Kaiser's, but still one of the greatest in the world.
Nice.
They have the old cathedrals, deathless reminders of a rich tradition. But they also have the great industrial cities of Birmingham, Glasgow, Manchester,
That's cool.
Leeds.
Such a stark
They
comparison.
seldom if ever saw an American tourist, but they made Britain, even in peacetime, one of the greatest industrial powers in the world.
Hell yeah.
And in wartime, even as late as July 1942, this little island, no larger than the state of Idaho.
Whoa, okay, I want to see this. This, I gotta say, just the factory work is so freaking interesting to me. It's such an incredible feat, like, just the amount of effort that was going into just general, like,
1942.
war
This
materials and whatnot. Like, what are these, like, some sort of barrel? Maybe, like, not like a 50 cal barrel. I don't know. It's just weird to see. You have, like, just lines and lines of workers just making straight up military equipment. It's just, I don't know, it's like really, really fascinating to me. It's just cool to see. I mean, I say it's not cool, it's pretty much out of necessity, as you can imagine, but it's just, there's something to be said about the entire country just coming together and working on this one effort.
little island, no larger than the state of Idaho, was making more war goods than we were.
Damn, I didn't know that.
Maybe you thought John Britton sat there and waited for us to send him planes and guns and tanks. Well, he's deeply grateful for what our Lend-Lease did for him. It saved his skin when he was in a tough spot. But today, Lend-Lease works in more ways than one. For today, John Britton himself furnishes planes and guns and tanks through the same Lend-Lease to us, to
Nice.
Russia, and his other allies all over the world. In Britain alone, our forces have received, free from the British, 1.5 million tons of food, clothing, and munitions,
Damn,
and
okay.
2.5 million tons of other materials. There's
Nice.
another thing you ought to know about Britain. If your unit gets sent there, you probably won't be invited out for supper or for a drink. That's not because the British don't want to entertain you. They haven't anything to entertain you with.
Like rationing or
Britain
something?
is mobilized for war, total war, and that means an end to civilian supplies.
Yeah.
If you were a Britisher, you wouldn't expect your girl to use lipstick.
Is it Britisher?
There isn't any, except what we bring over as bait. She wouldn't be smartly
Bait.
dressed.
Oh
for
my
clothes are
gosh.
rationed, severely rationed. It's very unlikely she wears stockings. For if she bought a pair of stockings a month, that would be all the clothes of any kind she could buy. That's some rationing.
Oh man, God forbid you don't have stockings. It is kind of funny to see the difference in just the times alone.
We think our gas rationing is tough, but John Britton gets no gas at all. He goes to
kidding.
a pub to buy a bottle of whiskey. The pub keeper laughs in his face. Grain is needed for industrial alcohol. Industrial alcohol is needed for munitions. And nearly all the reserve stock of British whiskey is kept for sale to America to pay for the goods Britain buys here.
Oh, come on, jeez.
But don't forget,
Americans doing them
besides
dirty.
Lend-Lease, Britain buys and pays for vast quantities of goods. And it was the cash purchases that Britain made before we entered the war that gave our munitions industry its start.
That's
and enabled
cool.
us to build it up in record time. He goes to buy a pack of cigarettes. There probably aren't any. But if there are,
2 shillings, please.
that's 40 cents for a pack of cigarettes. 12
Shillings.
cents represent the cost of the cigarettes. The other 28, the tax paid to the government. For Britain
Ooh.
is going all out in taxation.
Sheesh.
Nobody is making any money out of this war. Industry is paying. Excess profits tax is 100%.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Labor is paying. The man who earns $33 a week pays 29% income tax.
Oh
And the
man.
rich man, if there are any of them left, pays an income tax of no less than 97.5%.
Oh,
And then there's the
wow.
little matter of food. There are
That's
not
so
many
weird.
fat men in England nowadays. But John Britton isn't kicking. He knows 1 egg a week is helping him to win the war. The British rations are the rations of a free people. They could...
That is crazy. I want to hear if you guys have any stories of like relatives that have lived through World War II, how the rationing was, because that just seems insane. I mean, I've heard some stories about the Great Depression and sort of how people were making their own sorts of meals off of what they had, but this is something else. Like in the Great Depression, yeah, it was very hard, especially with like the whole Dust Bowl and everything getting hard as far as like the farmers growing their crops and whatnot. But I think if you had a certain amount of ingredients, you weren't as limited as you were during the rationing. I'm not sure I could be talking out of my butt on that one, but yeah, it sounds like it's almost worse than the Great Depression. But yeah, if you guys have any like firsthand accounts or, you know, some stories from your ancestors or your relatives, I want to know what that was like, because it sounds pretty brutal. But again, that's just the nature of the beast, and that's just part of the cool story of the country coming together and really putting everything forth for this war effort.
get food as they did in peacetime from Canada, Australia. But that would take ships, and the British prefer to use the ships for supplies to Russia, planes from America, troops to the Mediterranean. To win the war, every Britisher is on short rations.
Britisher,
Has been on
that's
short
so weird.
rations for 2 years. Everybody except the children. They get 4 times the eggs that grown-ups do.
That's
They
cool.
get all the oranges that arrive in Britain, and practically all of the extra milk. For John Britton is thinking of after the war, of the new world
That's awesome.
that his children and ours will inherit. A world where there will not only be freedom of speech and freedom of worship, but also freedom from want and freedom from fear.
It is not given to us to peer into the mysteries of the future. Still I avow my hope and faith, sure and inviolate, that in the days to come, the British and American peoples will, for their own safety and for the good of all, work together in majesty, in justice, and in peace.
This is what the British are fighting for. They are an old people, a stubborn people, and sometimes they have moved slowly. But in 3 years of blood and sweat and tears, John Britain has found his soul.
Nice. Nice touch.
Now he is tough. Now he is determined, and now he knows where he is marching, to victory and to a new world.
Oh, yeah.
He's a good man to have on our team.
Ain't no doubt about that. Ah, the Liberty Bell. Nice. Again, the editing in this thing is pretty freaking legit. I don't even know how they must have done it back then. Oh, nice. Now with a video like this, you can like really get stuck in. I know I'm pausing it to sort of, you know, obviously react and talk about my thoughts and whatnot. But it's so cool. For one, seeing the editing, because editing is really, really nice. But seeing all the old school footage of all these people and their awesome speeches. Again, you had the sort of twist of them having the propaganda and then debunking it. And just seeing all the old school footage of not just like the troops and the leadership, but just like the factory workers in general. And just the general scenery of how everything looked back then. It's just, again, it gives you a really good appreciation for how things actually were. And I think this video did a really good job of sort of showcasing all of that. But yeah, let me know if there was anything in this video that seemed a little bit wrong or incorrect, or if you guys can add anything to it. Definitely let me know down in the comment section. Again, from my understanding and from my perspective, it seemed like this video did a really good job of sort of summarizing the Brits entering into World War II and the sort of attitude and determination in World War II. But yeah, of course, if you guys have anything to add, let me know, especially if you have those firsthand accounts, or if, you know, you have some relatives or what have you that have sort of talked about that, or, you know, talked about their friends or some other experiences around the war and around this time period. That stuff is really, really cool to learn about. Now, if you guys have any other recommendations for documentaries like this, I'm more than willing to split it up and do these sorts of like series reactions. If it is like a BBC documentary, probably not going to do it because it's almost certainly going to get copyright claimed or blocked, which is pretty unfortunate. But this was a very cool one. Thank you guys again for the awesome recommendations. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the reaction. If you did, of course, hit that thumbs up, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff. But thank you again for supporting the channel. That is it for this video. I'll see you on the next one.